Hello, Ken. How are you this evening?
Dan, never better. How are you, my friend?
I am excellente. So tonight we are talking about fact versus fiction. We might want to define those words before we get started, Ken. Tell us what those words mean.
So what they mean to me, in simple language, what's so, the fact, and fiction, the stories that we can make up about what's so. And this past week was a fantastic example of that. I was working with someone who was talking about a breakdown that had occurred for him between him and his boss. He thought he had to go ahead to design a new position and to go ahead and submit that. And it was really just sort of pro forma that it was going to be approved and everything was fine. And when he turned in this proposal, which he thought was just going to be signed off on for his new position, the boss was kind of incredulous. Like, what do you mean, a new position? And his response was, well, I mean, you said it was fine. And as we deconstructed everything that happened, conversations with the CEO, conversations with the vice president of the company, conversations with associates, what we got down to was this person had taken all these disparate little pieces and woven them together in a story to create the outcome that he wanted. And in fact, the outcome wasn't related to fact. It was fiction. What he heard was, hey, that's a great idea. What he heard was, yeah, we really could use something like that. What he heard was, you'd be perfect for this. And because he heard all of those things, his mind went to, that must mean that I'm going to get this position if I propose it. And he did, and he didn't. And so it just opened my mind to the fact that we probably do this in a lot of different places in our lives, where we take little pieces of information, weave them together in a story with the outcome that we desire, even though that outcome may not be based in fact.
These are two topics that are near and dear to my heart. I'll tell you why. First, not to say I'm always fact-based, but the fact that I wrote a book about deception, right? So the opposite of deception is the truth. We'll call the truth facts in this case. And then the fiction is what I notice the most common theme among salespeople. And that's why salespeople get a bad rap. And I happen to train salespeople. So I like both of these topics. And I think there is a big difference. And I think it is real and apparent in most areas of our lives. The one that popped into my head right off the bat was texting. I both love texting for its simplicity and for its efficiency. And at the same time, texting can be the biggest area of fiction, not necessarily from the writer of the text, but from what we create in our minds as our interpretation of the text. And so you talked about hearing bits and pieces of information and then jumping to conclusions. And that reminds me of the movie Office Space, because in Office Space, the guy came up with a jumping to conclusions mat as his big idea. And that's really funny. Any rate, I notice myself do this probably every day. And I have to check myself because I will read tone into text. And then a little bit like, I can't believe that person said it that way. And I'm thinking, wait, they didn't say it anyway. Those are just words inside of a text that I just read on my phone. And somehow I considered they said it in a snarky way to me. Like, how dare they say it that way to me? And in fact, all they were probably doing is they could have meant nothing by it. They could have had a smile on their face when they said it. So I think it's very easy for us to create a fiction from what is seemingly innocent pieces of facts. And I think the area that we're all probably guilty of creating the fiction is in texting.
So I got a text this past week from a friend of mine who's doing some work around COVID testing in Los Angeles. And in his text, he said, I know you're connected to a lot of different community organizations there. We just want to use a space in a parking lot. We're not going to do any actual testing. We're just going to collect COVID. And he said, let me know what you think. It only takes about 20 seconds per person. And I thought, I have no idea what this means. And indeed, they are not collecting COVID per se. They're collecting samples. The samples are being sent out. The testing happens off-site. So, a simple error like that, off-site testing, would have been like a great way to say it, or off-site processing, or the lab will be off-site. But just a simple example of how things can break down so quickly with texting. That's like just the accuracy piece. I think the bigger piece, though, is the tone that you talked about. Because as you said, Dan, no one said anything anyway. They weren't speaking. It was just literally words that I'm reading on a phone. And the only person adding interpretation, the only person adding tone is me. There's no voice coming out. It's just me. I'm the only one that's adding the tone in. And so it's like, what do we walk into that with? Well, maybe it was my last interaction with that person, and I'm allowing the tone from that to carry over. Maybe it's, I was thinking about that person earlier in the day, and that thought may have been good, bad, indifferent, but whatever that thought was, I'm bringing that with me. And so it's my interpretation of those words based on the experience most recent with that person that can shift things. And one of the things I've been counseling people around, because I'm noticing that this is happening with more and more people, is that we don't listen for precise language. And maybe even more importantly, we don't question imprecise language. If your boss says, that sounds like a great idea, they didn't ask the next question, like, does that mean I can proceed with creating a proposal and giving it to you? Right? If your coworker says, you would be great at that, they didn't say, and I will recommend to our boss that we move ahead with this because the department can function with a new person, with a new staff person, and you would be better suited in this other job. So I've been really focused in my own listening on how precise or imprecise my listening is to other people, and the immediate interpretations that I make based on what I hear for the outcome that I want to get.
I wish this wasn't true, but it is a fact that I've been a party to more than one lawsuit that comes down to a contractual disagreement. And the interesting thing about a contractual disagreement is there's the literal letter of the law. It's like, what did this document represent your agreement to be, despite any sort of verbal understanding, despite any side emails or text messages or phone conversations or in-person conversations. Like, what did you agree to inside of this document? And then it's the court or the jury's job, the judge's job, to hear the arguments and then to come to a conclusion. So what's the purpose of telling you that is, I think the remedy is clarity from the start, right? But I think we avoid clarity from the start because we think it can ruin a good thing. I think that especially in sales, we think if I tell them, if I don't gloss over this part, this is the legalese, these are the whatever, right? This is the lawyer stuff. You don't need to read this, just initial there, sign there. And we're not very specific about that. We almost want to avoid that. We invite future problems, disagreements, because we weren't very upfront about the facts of what this agreement is supposed to be. And I'll give credit to a company that I'm currently associated with that is, they add extra notes. They call them contract notes to every one of their agreements. So even though they have all the standard language that's in there, they not only have contract notes that spell out what could be ambiguity, but they make sure that the sales representative reads out loud these contract notes and has the person initial next to them. So even though it could restate it multiple times here, they want to state it right here. Like, this won't be completed till this date at earliest. These are the payment terms, just so we're clear. This is that, whatever. So I think one of the ways to avoid people having misunderstandings because they see something as a fact that's really a fiction would be to simply be as upfront as you could possibly be. What Ken just said about one thing doesn't mean the other thing. We can't jump to conclusions just because you said this seems good. So are we okay to proceed? I think in all understandings and all interactions and all communications and agreements, I think we need to call out a future disagreement. And in fact, I heard a really good definition for a contract. A contract is not written to agree. A contract is written to know what to do when you disagree. Think about that. So you're not writing a contract to say, this is what we agree to, even though it's an agreement, that's a better word. You're literally stating, here's what happens if we have a disagreement later. Here's how this is handled. And that's the letter of the law.
Contracts are clarification. That's their purpose. Their purpose is to clarify that if we are at loggerheads, then we look at the contract, we read that, and we understand the solution, hopefully. Otherwise, lawyers, judges, juries. But shy of that, if a contract is well written, it's clear, and you understood it at the outset, then it is exactly what you said, Dan. It is there for that clarification purpose. I think the other piece why this is so important is the example I gave at the beginning of the conversation. That person spent almost a year in constructing what this position could look like, doing research, understanding it, looking at how it could benefit the company, on and on and on. And I don't want to say it was for nothing because, perhaps a year from now that will come open. But it really left a bad taste in his mouth. And after we talked, there was upset, not at the boss, but there was upset at himself for not getting clear on that. And when we got down to the why, it was because he was afraid that there might be a no. If he actually asked, does this mean it's okay for me to proceed? Does this mean you approve? Does this mean we're ready to actually create this position? He was afraid the answer would be no. And there was a bet that he made subconsciously that if he went forward with it and presented everything and it was beautifully drawn up, and it's like extremely well done, well written, well reasoned, that the boss just couldn't say no. And there's a lot of heartache after that. And man, the trouble he could have saved himself by just asking at the outset. It's a great lesson. I hope people who are listening take it to heart. So much better to be disappointed at the outset than to invest time, energy, and effort into something, and then 6 months, 9 months, a year later, find out that the person never had an intention of proceeding in that particular way.
So I love the phrase, nothing has any meaning except the meaning we give to it. And what's interesting about that, without opening a huge can of worms, would be that you could have large groups of people watch something on video and then have a literal fight over what just they watched on video. And what I think is happening there is they're reading intent. It's almost like going back to that text thing. They're reading what was probably in the head of the people in this video, what they might have been thinking and what their intentions might have been, and not just looking at the face value of what they're watching happening on the video. And it's the same exact thing we do in text. Like, we can read something and they're literally just words that we're reading on a screen, but we have to add to that and create intent of the person who wrote those words, or emotion behind the person who wrote their words, or anything related to that. So I think the key, because this is all about helping people, would be if something happens in your life, if you get sent a video of somebody doing something, you see a picture of somebody doing something, you read a text that somebody wrote, you read an email that they wrote, and your immediate jump to conclusions is all you dramatize it, you make it bigger than it is. I would say, like we said this in the last podcast, kill the monster while it's little. Go right to the source, right? And ask those questions. Don't create them in your head first, because then you have to back off of these created intentions and thoughts and emotions behind what is just hopefully a fact. Like, I saw you do that. I read you wrote that. I heard you said that. And then you can say, please share with me, what were you thinking? What was your intention behind that? Why did you do that? And let them share. I think we'd all be in a much better place in this world if, again, without opening the can of worms, if we gave people a little bit of the benefit of the doubt to be imperfect, to be able to explain themselves. The simple version is autocorrect, right? I could say something to you, and if it autocorrects it weird, you're like, I cannot believe he just said that to me. And then I'll go, no. That was not my intention. And you go, I get it. Yes, I see what you were trying to say. It autocorrected. I jumped to conclusions because I thought you really meant that when you said it, but I realize now that was so close to that word, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, let's show all of us a little grace. Let's have a little patience. And if we want to have clear communication, really get to the facts, then I think we need to pause and look at whatever we see, hear whatever we hear, read whatever we read, and then say, let me go to the source and let me ask what their intention was. Let me ask what their emotion behind that was and what they want me to do with this information that I now have in front of me.
I think that the can of worms that you are hesitant to open about meaning is a really good one, because we are meaning making machines. It's what we do. We love to assign meaning to things. We have to put something in a category. It is the most difficult conversation for people to have, to just listen for what's so, to just listen to what's being said and to not assign meaning to it, to pause, to take it in, to ask questions, to clarify, to get to language that's specific and precise, and to step away from language that is vague. And even more challenging, to take emotion out of it and just allow the words to speak for themselves. And I would revisit what I said at the beginning. There are those facts. There's just what's so, and then there's the story about what's so. And the best exercise I've ever engaged in when I feel myself getting upset about something, or I feel myself getting super excited about something that I think is going to come true, is to stop myself and ask, is that what really got said? And go back to the text, the email, the conversation, whatever it happened to be, and revisit it and ask myself, what's actually there that's like provable? To go to your point, if this were in a court of law, what would a judge say? What would a jury say? Would the jury say that, yes, this was promised? Or would they just say, no, the person just said that's a nice idea? And so I'd challenge everyone, stop, like you were saying, Dan, pause. Just take a break and ask yourself, what actually got said? And if it's not clear, clarify it. And if it is clear, maybe that'll set you free from negative emotions that you may have attached to it on your own.
My simple definition of negative emotions is expectations not being met. That's it. All negative emotions come when you have an expectation, that expectation is not met. And if it's not met in a big way, it's the opposite of what you expected. You're very low negative emotion. So one of the things that I recommend in coaching is to temper your excitement. So on the positive side is people are so excited to tell me about an opportunity they have or a new relationship they're having or something else. And it sounds like I'm being a pessimist, but I'm trying to protect a future disappointment by jumping ahead too far into the future. I call it future pacing. Like already talking about like a new relationship, like the traveling this summer you're going to do with this person. I'm like, okay, this sounds really promising, but we might be getting too far down the road in our excitement. So let's temper the excitement. So I think it works on both extremes. I always say, like, if this is neutral, there's highs and lows, right? There's positives and there's negatives. But I think the best of the best mindset you can have is very composed, very neutral, right? And anytime you notice yourself getting too amped up, excited, and you're going too far down the road in your expectations, there are a lot of variables that could come into play there. It's great to have future thinking and to be optimistic and to set goals and there's future realities. But I always say is before you go too far, temper it a little bit, bring yourself back down to this neutral thinking, this composed thinking, and then just control the controllable, set what you can do. So I think it works obviously on the other side too, right? Before you get too mad at something, like, right, temper it, bring it back up, get back into neutral, find out more details before you go to tune down this path where it's like you dug yourself a big hole metaphorically. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I reacted that way and said those terrible things to that person because I thought one thing and I didn't allow myself to stay neutral, be composed, and do the right thing. There's a quarterback, Russell Wilson, and his mental coach teaches him that if you were to see him interviewed after the game, that you would not know if he won or lost. He says he practices this mindset, this physiology, this demeanor that is neutral, right? So again, you didn't watch the game and you just saw his interview. You'd say, I don't know what just happened. And I think that would be the ideal for all of us to strive for, is no matter what we see in front of us, here in front of us, whatever fact we think we just observed or heard or whatever, that we try to stay neutral, get more information, and take it one step at a time to progress further.
So Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America for more years than I can count. And he was because of the technique that you just mentioned. When he delivered the news, he delivered it in such a tone that was almost emotionless, so that you could just hear the news, and he almost faded into the background. He served as the vehicle to deliver it. And the reason he was so trusted was because he didn't embellish. He didn't make it happier than it was. He didn't make it sadder than it was. He simply said what was so. In my mind, he perfected that notion of what's so, without story, without embellishment, without the highs, without the lows. And as a result, literally the most trusted man in America. I think it's a great example for people to follow. And I think it's a challenge for us to emulate, but one that's absolutely worth it.
So to wrap this up, it is a fact that you are probably creating most of the fictions on your own. So take personal responsibility and realize that a lot of the facts are just that. They're just sitting right in front of us, and we'd have to create the fictions to make them different than they are. So let's not do that. Let's see things and hear things and read things, and then pause and remain neutral and get more facts before we go too high or too low. And then let's progress forward and be that Zen, live in the now. And then you're going to have more facts. They're going to make your life even better.